Peter Thiel has this question, which I thought is amazing. What's your 10-year goal? And then he'll say, why can't you achieve it in 1 year? So will a company someday, which has product market fit, go from 1 to 100 in a year?
So Sterling and I are stoked to be here at Audacious Ventures headquarters here in San Francisco with Nakul Mandan. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Nailed it?
Nailed the pronunciation.
Give it a shot, Sterling.
8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Nakul Mandan. I've known you on Twitter for a couple of years now, and you start writing a few things that stick in my head, and it makes me think I've got to get this guy on the podcast. So we're stoked to be here. I want to cover, there's 2 blog posts you wrote about. We're going to go deep dive into both of those. One about mistakes that founders make recruiting, and then the other is kind of what makes an audacious founder. We're going to talk about both of them. But before we get to them, I'd love it if you told our listeners, who are mainly founders and early stage operators, a little about your story. Specifically, you're at Lightspeed, you have this insight that you want to help founders a certain way, and it leads you to the insight that gets you to start Audacious. Can you tell that story?
Yeah.
And we'll dive into that.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me.
Yep.
Likewise, I've followed you guys over the years, and so excited to do this with you. So my story is I grew up in India, studied there. My dad was an entrepreneur throughout his career. He's retired now. And so growing up, I wanted to just follow in his footsteps, sort of a naive take as a teenager, just thought this is how careers are, you start a company. So the entrepreneurial bug in me was pretty early on. I got into investing in India in 2006, more thinking I'll do investing for 3-4 years, learn how companies are run, and then start a company of my own. And then this firm, very well-known firm called Battery Ventures, hired me in Mumbai. And this was May of 2009. And here I was feeling that I'm a stud. I found this Silicon Valley job in the middle of a financial crisis. But as all best laid plans go, literally I joined on the Monday, and on Wednesday, the head of the firm called me and said, look, we just let go of the guy who's leading the India practice, but we still want to do India. So why don't you come here, focus on India from here for a few years, learn our way of doing things. And when you're more senior and a few other people around you are more senior, you guys go back and set up that office.
That's awesome.
So that's how I came to the US. I had not
That's
planned
wild.
for my career to be here. In fact, my life plan was to start a company in 2-3 years after doing that. So came here in September 2009 on an H-1B visa.
By the way, was that an easy yes? Were you like, yes, I'm in?
Or
I
was
wanna
that
move?
like, maybe I made a mistake and,
That the interesting part, it was kind of an easy yes because I was single, so there was not much, like I talked to my parents a little bit. It was a big move. I'd never visited the US ever in my life. But at some level, I felt like it's in the middle of a financial crisis. They're sending me to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
How bad can it be,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Like, I'm getting closer to the mothership here. I will say the tricky part was in 2009, the narrative in India and China was that the US is done. The financial crisis is a change of the guard, and India and China are the future. And a lot of the firms we all admire, the McKinseys, the Sequoias, the Blackstones of the world, in every category of or every genre of industry, were actually moving to India. And so my advisors were actually saying, hey,
This
are
is
you
maybe
sure?
a mistake.
Yeah. But I was like, look, I don't want to be in the job market anymore. This is a tough market. I'm just going to Silicon Valley. I'll figure it out. In retrospect, they were right a little bit. That I came here, I quickly realized that the Battery India story was not going to work out. Battery was looking for Silicon Valley businesses in India. India didn't have those at the time. And so, candidly, in the first 3 months that I moved here, I thought I'm going to get fired. I'm not exaggerating this. I just found a way to transition to the US side by volunteering for enough Battery partners in those next 6 months, because morning and nights I would call the Indian companies, but during the day, India was sleeping, so I had a lot of time on my hands. So I just started volunteering for the partners in the US at Battery. And so in 6 months, when they shut down the India practice, they actually...
You were still okay.
Yeah, I'm the lone survivor of that India team in some ways. They gave me a chance to reinvent myself in the US and as a US associate. So that was, I'm forever grateful for that opportunity.
And,
And that was a game changing
is this the
for my
first
life.
time where you're like asking yourself, what type of VC am I going to be? How do I differentiate myself with a bunch of others who have a network in the US that you didn't have?
Uh, so at that time, I was an associate, and it was much simpler than that, which is, I didn't have a network. It was a sourcing first role. So I needed to basically bootstrap my way into success as an associate, sourcing some companies or not, right? And so at that time, it was just one is for the next 2, 3 years, I was the hardest working associate on Sandal Road. I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but not too much. Like even on a Sunday, I would wake up and the laptop would come into my lap and I would just cold email the shit out of Silicon Valley. I would read a lot. I remember Quora was coming up at the time, and I would put up anonymous questions on Quora saying, how do restaurant managers use software? How do construction managers use software? And the answers that would come, I'd look them up, and if it looked interesting, I'd just cold email those founders. So I was doing a lot of hacky stuff, and of course, building my network slowly, but a lot of it was just brute forcing. And then I sourced this company called Marketo for battery. It was a growth deal.
Cold email?
Uh, honestly, it was more like I ran into the founder at a conference. Yeah, just like, if you hustle hard enough, you bump into luck. So it wasn't around that time. It was really, at that time, look, it was like I had just arrived here 6 months ago. I was an associate. My primary job was to find
Yeah.
deals and source, right? And so I wasn't overthinking it. I just was brute forcing it. And for those next 2, 3 years after they allowed me to transition myself to the US practice, I was probably the hardest working associate on Sandal Road. I'm probably exaggerating. There are many people who work hard, but only slightly exaggerating it. And so I was brute forcing in the sense that I didn't have a network. So I remember Quora was coming up as an example at that time, and I would put up anonymous questions on Quora saying, how do restaurant managers use software to run their business better? And how do construction managers use software? And the answers that would come, I would just cold email those companies if they were interesting enough, right? I would read a lot of TechCrunch, anything that sounded interesting would just cold email. So it was a lot of like in those days, because I didn't have a network, reading a lot, creating hacky ways to find where companies are getting mentioned and just getting in front of them ahead of the rest of the firm. Um, and then brute forcing that led me to events and other things. So slowly the network also built. And ultimately, the big thing that changed was I sourced a company called Marketo. At that time, it was already a growth investment. And again, that was where, if you hustle hard enough, you run into luck. So I ran into him at a conference, and I'd been tracking him, so I saw him from a distance. I ran towards him and found a way for us to engage, and then that led to the investment. And that kind of changed my life because Marketo ended up being a great investment for battery, and that led me to get more opportunity. I got promoted to VP and then started leading the diligence. I was kind of the guy who every partner would ping for all of their SaaS diligences at the time in 2010, 2012.
You were pretty new to the job, so you're
Yeah.
doing a lot of brute force. You get kind of you run into luck from hustling.
Yeah.
Which parts of the job were you liking? Because your plan was do venture for a couple years, go start a company. Like in those early innings, what were you enjoying about venture?
I think I was always a student of the game of company building, even in those days. So the most enjoyable part of venture, even today, continues to be dreaming the dream and trying to understand what will make this work in a super big way. So even when I would get on calls, I would ask a lot of questions, right, that are very tactical and operational. And that was the start of my getting into go-to-market. Is like if a business would be a $5 million and they are planning to go from 5 to 10, 5 to 12, I try to understand what can make it go faster, right? What can we, what kind, and so it would come back often, okay, I don't have enough sales reps. And why? Because sales reps have quota. So that means quota capacity. And so I would just become a student of, I'd become a student of that game. And in those calls, that was enjoyable. And learning how outlier businesses can be built and what are the constraints on being an outlier. Good is the enemy of great was something that was always in my head. So sourcing, ultimately, look, hustle is a key ingredient for success in my mind in venture, in most jobs, but definitely in venture. Uh, Nobody likes to hustle. It's like nobody wants to go to the gym, but you have to do it for the thing that follows. And you have to enjoy everything that follows enough that you put in the hard work, right? And so for me, just the craft of company building was always something that I admired.
When you got into dissecting those businesses, were there any common threads? You mentioned, asking when you ask the question, what could make them go faster? Because that's one cool thing about ventures. You get to see, you get so many at bats. What were the common constraints that you just ran into over and over again?
Yeah. I've actually blogged about this. There's a blog post I wrote in 2017, so many years ago now, talking about non-linearity in B2B. And I kind of, Peter Thiel has this question, which I thought is amazing. He likes to ask the person in front of him, what's your 10-year goal? And then he'll say, why can't you achieve it in 1 year? And it kind of forces this idea that, and his exact statement, if I recall, I'm paraphrasing, was a lot of people think they have to do things sequentially when actually you can do some of the things parallelly. And so I was like, okay, how does that apply to my world? So will a company someday, which has product market fit at $1 million and an extremely large market, go from 1 to 100 in a year? So this was in 2017. Now we are beginning to see the early uh, start like innings of that with Cursor and other things. And I broke it down into what the operational constraints are, and I got it down to four. Uh, Pipeline slash market awareness. If the customer is not aware of you, how will they buy? Second is sales capacity. So they are aware of you, but you need salespeople to sell to them. So you need enough salespeople to go from 1 to 100. 100 sales reps of $1 million of quota each. Uh, Third is onboarding, if there's customer success and stuff like that. And fourth is the capital needed to hire 100 sales reps and stuff. Uh, and then there's maybe a fifth one, which is recruiting 100 people in 1 year is extremely tough, right? So you need that. But again, that is a capital constraint, an operational constraint. The more macro one is how do you scale culture in 1 year, going from 10 people to 100 people, let's say, or something like that. And so, yeah, so those were some of the things that kept bubbling in my head. So those were things, if you're obsessed with that, that the job is never boring, right? That's the best part about the venture job, or the two best parts are meeting amazingly ambitious people and being able to participate in their journeys. And then it's like a constantly fascinating puzzle on company building.
So I think a big part of your story too is, at least as we've talked, you've said you kind of wanted to be known as the go-to-market guru.
The way it played out was, so in 2014 I joined Lightspeed as a principal, and that is the first time I started leading my own checks. And as I was going through that journey, I was thinking, okay, what is my partnership with the founder going to be like? What is the value I can provide? And there are all these other people who've been founders before. I'm becoming a career VC. I'd not planned to be a career VC, but that is what I was becoming. And so I needed to find something where I could feel like, hey, on this one thing, I'm going to be really, really good. This is why you picked me. So I really wanted to find something that I can be the best in class at, and where founders pick me over competitive options. And I had already, because of that build up from battery to light speed, and already had started to dig in on how can non-linearity happen in enterprise startups. And so at some level there was already some base foundation, and so I just became again a student of the game. I cold emailed so many heads of sales and marketing around that time, literally on LinkedIn, and just would get on half an hour calls and try to understand their game. Um, and in 2014 to 2016, 17, I became really, really good at it, I think. Even now, I feel like I can have one of the most nuanced discussions on B2B go-to-market engines with anyone at 0 to 1, and at the 0 to 25, $30 million journey, and even beyond, I would feel like comfortable saying that I can have one of the most nuanced discussions, because there's no perfect formula. All that said, around 2017, one of the things that started clicking for me is that I've always throughout my life been very good at understanding the machinery. But there was some missing link. And the missing link was that you still need outlier people to make the magic happen. Even if that knowledge is available to all of us.
Yeah.
It's on Twitter now, it's on Blogosphere, it's on YouTube. Uh, but it's still, there's no formula to success in anything. And so, because you still have to make a lot of micro decisions.
Yep.
And it's not as simple as this is how the sales machine works. You then have to hire amazing sales reps.
Yep.
To hire amazing sales reps, you need to have an amazing head of sales. To have an amazing head of sales, you need to have an amazing founder who can close that amazing head of sales. So I think in 2017, after I'd done enough investments and had some pattern recognition of what was happening in my portfolio, what was happening in my best companies in my portfolio, and also pattern recognition across the broader Lightspeed portfolio and what was working, it just hit me very starkly that I've been missing one key thing, which is it all starts with outliers. The frameworks are available, and I've been good at frameworks, and I needed to completely change it. So I would say since then, I've become completely a people-first investor, and even on my help, I went whole hog more towards recruiting. Because I'll give you an example of a company. So there's a company in my portfolio called Multiverse in London. It's not very well known, but it's a pretty big business now in the UK. And I'd led the seed round there, and that company was already doing well, 1 to 4, 4 to 11. But then we recruited this guy, Jeremy Duggan, who was already a legend in the sales world, to the company as a CRO or president. And we had to fight for him. He was already a legend. We were a Series A company at the time. The competition was $1 billion company that was vying for his talents, and we closed him. We did everything. Like, I sourced him for the portfolio company, and then a lot happened to make this recruiting thing happen. In the following years, the company went from 11 to 38 and 38 to 100.
All because
And
of this
just
hire.
a lot of it,
Yeah.
right? Of course, the company had great product market fit. And of course, it was only possible because there was a CEO at the center of it
Yep.
who was able to make this hire.
Yep.
Because this is not an easy hire to make happen. But seeing Jeremy operate as the president, I concluded, what's better than my advice is if I can hire Jeremy Duggans again and again. The following statement then is more true. There are very, very few Jeremy Duggans, so you have to find them. So that kind of became the genesis of, by the time I was leaving Lightspeed, why Audacious is set up as a, really a venture firm with a recruiting agency fused in. All of that build up of my battery and Lightspeed years came together for me.
So this is where I got very excited in our
Yeah.
convo, because the insight to me just is so true that you can get so good at the framework of go-to-market and you can speak fluently about anything, but if you don't have the right people, that's actually a more upstream problem. That's the root problem you have to solve. And so you're going to focus your entire career from here on out finding the right people. And now you've got this internal recruiting motion, and you've kind of become an expert on how founders should recruit. And this is, I think, the meat and potatoes of this discussion that I'd love to get into.
Yeah.
Obviously, the best way for a founder to get your help is to raise money from you.
Yeah.
But for the thousands of founders who are going to listen to this who may not ever raise from you, I want to do a quick boot camp or deep dive on one of the blog posts you wrote. You ready for this?
Let's do it.
All right. So the quick framework is there's 5 mistakes that founders make when recruiting, and we're going to go through all 5 of them.
Okay.
First one, I'll read it to you, and then I just want you to expound, is not internalizing that good is the enemy of great. What does that have to do with recruiting? Teach us.
So, this is, I would say, good is the enemy of great is one of those great sentences or great phrases that probably applies to all of startup world in many, many different ways. But on
Gary Tanon, who said there's no B's or C's in startups. You're either an A or you're an F.
Yeah. And so I think on talent specifically, you have to really internalize that they're amazing. So good and great, the easy mistake is they're close to each other on the same spectrum of people. And I was that way. I know this deeply today because till 2017, I also thought that way. And I think once you start seeing some great people, you realize, no, they're on a completely different spectrum. The difference between the good and great is as big as the difference between good and horribly bad. They just create different outcomes altogether. And so if somebody hasn't internalized this, it's difficult to convince them in a 90-day recruiting period. So I think the first mistake is that not internalizing that I am not looking for an engineer, a front end engineer. I'm not looking for a sales leader. I'm really looking for that outlier sales leader who will make things happen for me, who will make improbable outcomes happen for me. And those are very few people, and I'm going to hunt those people down and I'm going to close them. If you don't have that full internalization, that there are very few of them, and I'm going to do whatever it takes, your process, your mindset is set up for landing with good people.
Which is so tempting because they're
Yeah.
good.
They're
And to
good.
your point,
By the way, if you've never seen great,
That's
good
right.
is great.
That's right.
So you have to first of all have some exposure to a sort of a game-changing hire before you even know what to benchmark against.
So isn't that true that how do you know if it's great? Like, how does a founder
This
know
is
what
why-
great looks like?
Until you have a Jeremy, everyone kind of looks the same
like-
flavor of good.
So this is why I think some founders do have an unfair advantage when they come from great cultures.
Exactly.
Right.
You've seen greatness.
People, some people call it taste. I call it like having seen greatness and having a taste for greatness.
100%.
Right. And so if you're coming out of a great Silicon Valley culture or Silicon Valley
Or
type
Utah.
company,
Or you,
a great Utah culture. Yeah.
you would have seen that, and
That's
you would
right.
have even for me, like one of my mentors is this guy Bipul Sinha, who is the founder and CEO of Rubrik, and he was a partner at Lightspeed, and he recruited me, or he initially introduced me to Lightspeed when he was leaving to start Rubrik. And having seen his journey, like alongside Jeremy and some other people, and that is how I got a sense, oh, this is what greatness looks like. This is the intensity, the determination, the quality of thinking. So I think you have to have that exposure. And if you don't have that exposure, I think it's a problem.
yeah.
I do think this is one good area where investors can help companies, because say you're you're a first time founder and you don't have all the same reps, you can lean on somebody to say like, hey, do they have the marks of somebody who's great, or am I getting seduced by good? I think that's one area where investors can be very valuable to, particularly like first time founders.
And that's what I mean, that when we get involved, we try to make this clear. But at some level, again, we are looking for founders who already have this. If we are trying to convince them post-investment that good and great are two very different things,
They're not a
then
good fit.
it's probably not a good fit for us, at least.
Yeah. Okay. So mistake number one is a founder that doesn't internalize the difference between good and great. Let's say they're
And what it takes to close them.
and what it takes to close someone truly great.
Yeah.
Do you find people, do they get hung up on price, or are they just not, they don't have the caliber that another A player is looking for? Or when you say that they can't close them, what does that usually mean?
Yeah, so in that blog post that I think Tyler is referring to, this is the fifth point which I make, which is closing is war, right? And why? Because that amazing person that you want to recruit is the kind of person who, on the day they resign, will get a counter offer from their boss. On the day they tell their friends and mentors and call up, hey, I have this offer, that mentor who's at another company will be, oh, I didn't know you would be open. Like, how about we work together? That also is the person who often in Silicon Valley has an offer from, knows that they can raise a $5 million seed round
Yeah,
quickly.
go start a company.
Okay, so they have many options.
Yep. And they know it.
And they know it. And so closing starts, first of all, right from the first meeting, right? So we tell our founders that if you like somebody, then every meeting is a buy and sell meeting. Of course, you want to interview them, but if they leave that meeting only having been interviewed and you like them more than they liked you at the end of it, then that was an opportunity that was missed. Because what will happen is you'll keep interviewing, you'll be in buy mode throughout,
Yeah.
and by the time you're ready to sell mode, it feels too early for them because they've not been sold on the opportunity. The second, so one is just approaching the game as only buying,
'Kay.
when it could be buy and sell throughout.
'Kay.
Second is not understanding that every sales motion has an emotional sale aspect to it, right? So that's why, like, okay, offer. Of course, offer matters when you were talking about pricing, but has this person been sold on the larger than life story of this company? Why is this company one of the most important companies of the next decade potentially? Why should this amazing person bring their talent to this company? Why should this person spend time with you? That's all emotional. That so and the most ambitious people want to work in great things,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and so you have to kind of internalize that. So it's not just the pricing or the offer. Of course, the offer needs to matter, and I think ultimately there is an element of the offer needs to match the talent.
Yeah.
And uh, personally, I think this is too aggressive for our own founders sometimes. But like my belief is that if I'm getting the 99th percentile talent, if I'm paying 90th percentile comp, I'm getting a deal.
Yep.
Personally, that's
Yep.
how I feel. Uh, but if you start a conversation with a founder whom you're advising and they think this advice is saying overpay. No, I'm actually
Underpay.
saying that be determined to find that absolute top
Well,
one
we have this
percentile.
debate a lot. Like, who's the most underpaid player in the NBA? It's LeBron James,
Yeah.
and he's also the highest paid player. One of the highest paid. It's the great ones are truly bargains. Is kind of what you're saying. Back to your first point, because they're 100x better than maybe the next best.
They also have a multiplicative effect in terms of
Yes.
the quality of talent they
A's
bring, the
attract
quality of
A's.
decision making they bring to the culture that they set in terms of the bar.
Yeah. All right, so we've actually covered two of them now, and we'll get back to the closing
Yeah.
one. But so not internalizing good versus great and how few it is and how hard it is. Number two was lack of clarity on role and job spec. What are the mistakes people make there?
So I think this is even more so in go-to-market roles, but I think it can exist anywhere, right? So a generic way of doing, like if you look at job descriptions, they are so generic in nature, and often the lazy way of recruiting is, hey, telling my recruiter like I'm looking for a marketer, just send me the good ones. Well, they have no idea what to look for. Like, so you want to be very specific, and I'm a big fan of this book called Who, which actually talks about recruiting, and they basically summary is that people think what is the problem. They talk about the strategy and everything. Often the problem is who. Who are you hiring? But the who problem actually then goes deeper into people don't know what they're looking for. And so they follow this framework called mission outcomes competencies, as an example. What is the mission of this role? What are the outcomes this person would have driven if they were successful in these roles, and what are the competencies they need for those outcomes to possibly happen, right? If you go into that level of detail, you will come out feeling, okay, I'm not looking for a marketer, I'm looking to solve a demand gen problem, okay? Or I'm looking to solve a messaging product marketing problem or a brand marketing problem. Well, those are three different problems, right? And so what is the actual problem? Are you looking for more leads, or are you finding that leads are there but we have a middle and bottom of the funnel problem, so our messaging is not landing, or maybe the product itself is not landing? So you need to identify the problem you're solving and then interview based on, will this person be able to solve this problem? So that's more specific, right? Even on sales, again, like, do you have a like, do you have a bottom of the funnel problem, a middle of the funnel problem, or a pipe generation problem? Do you have a sales rep hiring problem?
Does that go against, kind of the conventional wisdom of, hey, if you find an A player, just put them on the bus? Do they mesh together, or is this sort of a separate point? Because I really like the point you're making. I'm just curious how it goes with, hey, if you find a 99th percentile, but they're not.
This is why I repeatedly, when I blog, and candidly, this is why I did not blog for a long time. I felt like all frameworks have an exception.
Yeah.
And life is not a formula. And venture and startups are not a formula. So I can say all these rules here.
Yeah.
I probably suggest sometimes when I'm in the moment working with the founder to break those rules, and the founders, and by the way, I've been wrong many times. Is also one thing I handle. So I treat all these frameworks as, if you're good at something, you will start having your rules.
Yeah.
But if you're great at something, you know when to break your rules.
Yep.
Right? And so there's that element. But to more directly answer your question, I think startups need to have lean and mighty teams. And so I am still of the view that that if you run into somebody truly amazing, you still have to at least think about what the problem they will
Yeah.
solve
Yep.
once they're here.
You agree
And
with that?
maybe the answer is that, yeah, they will solve a cultural problem of raising the bar. But if literally there's nothing, I'd probably bias towards not slipping into that. But amazing people are so few that maybe the answer is wrong. I'm
So
giving the wrong
I
answer.
like this, and the way that it would make the most sense to me is just where do you start? If you start because you know someone in your network or whatever that just came on the market and they're incredible, then you start to think about, well, what could the job be? Most of the time you should start at the other end, which is, what is the job and then who, and you kind of follow your framework. But that makes a lot of sense to me.
See, I think that's the next piece in that blog, which is once you know exactly what you're looking for, have you set up the pipeline?
Yeah,
Or
so this
are
is the
you
third
putting
mistake.
yeah.
A weak pipeline. So
Yeah.
what
Are
is
you-
the mistake and what's the fix?
So are you putting in enough effort to meet enough high quality candidates?
How
right?
many is
And,
enough?
I'm thinking a little bit so that I answer it properly. I think 10 great candidates would be enough, but to
10?
get to 10 great candidates, you need to meet a lot of candidates actually.
Yeah, 10
right?
great,
10 great,
truly great candidates is
10
hard.
truly great is actually kind of impossible in any search, to be honest.
There
Like,
might be 10 in the whole
10
industry.
good to great would be a solid search.
Yeah.
Most searches, believe it or not, end up with one finalist. I always kind of try to push even our talent team that, hey, I hope that we end up with 2 finalists, but it's actually difficult to end up because, again, the great person is rare. So I would rephrase my 10 good to great people. If you ran into that, you had a phenomenal search. But to get to that, you need to meet a lot. And to get to meet a lot, you need to set up the pipelines on day one. So often, I'll say the easy mistake on pipeline generation is day one, the search starts. You think it's a 90-day search. Day 30, the recruiter sent you all the candidates that they had found in the last search, who they thought were good enough, and they tried to force fit into this search. And you're like, this is not a fit for my problem, right? And so day 30, you're basically nowhere in the search. And often, a lot of searches have a come to Jesus moment at day 30 that we're fucking wasting time here, right? And so now you've lost 30 days. But
Well,
the
can I
reason is
even-
you did not go on day 0 all in on this is what I want and I need pipeline very quickly. And you need to then set up the sourcing funnel. So if Audacious is one of your funnel, your own network, and then third is third-party recruiters.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask is isn't it a yellow flag if founders are just relying on recruiters anyway? Shouldn't they be sourcing
I
themselves?
think the best founders we work with are relentless at sourcing through the networks.
100%.
Relentless.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say it is a yellow flag. It might be even a red flag if they are not relentlessly sourcing through their networks and their extended networks, because then it means they want the easy way out of somebody else doing the job.
That's right. You can't outsource the most important thing, which
So,
is recruiting.
even for us, where we have recruiting as our
This is
value
Sterling's
prop,
question.
This
from
is, this
before.
is my
Okay.
question.
So let's
because
ask that.
I've
Ask
by
it.
the way, I'm curious for your thoughts on this because the recruiting firms, the big ones, they hit up the same databases every time, and I'm like, the people who respond to those recruiters
Adverse
are of a
selection.
negative select to me.
Yeah.
The person who responds to a founder to me is high positive select. You're saying set up, use all the tools available to you, which makes sense to me. I'm curious though, if you see majority of the great people, do they come directly from founder outreach? Do they come from Audacious? Do they come from third-party recruiting? Or is it just sort of all over the place?
So engineers, they respond to founders much more.
Okay.
Sales reps can respond. Sales reps are pretty social.
Okay.
So again, it depends on the persona, the role, and everything, and the stage of the company.
Okay.
For the first 7 engineers, let's say, I would say our best founders, our experiences, that our best founders already on the day they are starting know the first 3 engineers they want to hire.
Yeah.
And so even for Audacious, where we are running these things, we have a full machinery built here, we feel our best founders find the first 3 engineers themselves. Around the 4th engineer, they start feeling, should I hire the 4th best engineer I know, or should I tap into the larger network, right? And that's where we step in. But regardless, I'd say for any founder running any search, especially on engineering, I think the first 2 funnels first funnel absolutely should be their extended network.
Okay.
Second should be Audacious if you have us in your cap table. And I can talk about that as to how we approach that. But we do it in a very specific way, and I do believe we've built the best startup recruiting engine in town because of the specifics and the detail orientation we've put. The third is a debatable thing, which is if you have a weak pipeline from one or two, then maybe at some point you need contingency recruiters. I say it's debatable because the challenge with contingency recruiters is the volume is often high and the quality is often very low. And so the founder has to be really good at saying no to anybody that they don't think meets the bar, and has to be very specific in the communication. If you can't do that, you will end up in a bad place. By the way, everything I just described is why it's hard. The theory of good to great is cool. Okay, the theory of knowing what you want, cool. The execution is where it matters, and the execution starts with the pipeline generation.
So Sterling asked a question before we started recording that I'd love for you to share thoughts on, which is any founder that relies on Audacious to recruit for them, aren't they negatively selected? They're not actually the type of founder that's going to go out and make it happen. And you were sharing some thoughts on you kind of agreed and
look,
you're not changing the outcome, you're just helping. Talk about that.
So our view on this is at this point pretty clear. When we are investing, we are looking for forces of nature who will make improbable outcomes happen. And I'm using very specific words. I believe startup success is an improbable outcome. Most startups fail. And if it's an improbable outcome, to increase the probability of success, you need somebody at the center of it who's capable of improbable outcome. We call them forces of nature, and we can go into what we look for there. But these forces of nature, they're unstoppable people. They are going to be successful with or without anybody specific, Audacious or whoever specific in their life. Why? Because they will need help, but they'll find the help that they need to succeed, right? They are not relying on a Tyler or a Nakul to help them.
They're resourceful. They're not going to be
resourceful.
dependent
They're going
on
to get
anything.
it.
Yep.
So the best founders still need help. They will just find that help. The question is really, have you earned the right
To
through
make
your
the
body
cut.
of work to be one of the 5 to 10 people who can truly help a force of nature?
Yeah,
because they are selective.
That's a high bar.
with the kind of help they need, because they're already resourceful. They already are going to make things happen, and so the bar is very high. Can I actually help a force of nature?
That's
so
right.
you need to bring that. So Audacious intends to bring that body of works, that substance, that intensity, to be able to help the forces of nature. So yes, if we relied on people who need us, that's a negative signal.
You're screwed.
We don't even want to invest in them.
Yep.
We are trying to invest in people who don't need us, and we are not going to change a good outcome to a great outcome. We are just participating in a great outcome, but we are going to be one of the few people who we believe we can be one of the few people who can increase the odds of success.
Amplify a great outcome.
Increase the odds of success, and hopefully amplify the scale of the success.
So Tyler always says, he has a phrase he always says, and it's water meets its level, right? And what's interesting here is you're actually talking about water meeting its level on both ends. The investor has to earn the right to be one of these 5 to 10 people who end up actually being helpful, because most of the time, you have a cap table and people are like trying to act helpful, but they don't meet that bar, not even close. But you're saying equally, obviously, for a good outcome, you have to be an actual force of nature that doesn't necessarily need you. Therefore, water has met its level, and you can have the best possible outcome.
Yeah, I think, look, like anything in life, there's 1% or maybe 0.1% great people in any profession. And I think that's true for VC.
Yep.
Our intent at Audacious is to be that 0.1% firm who can actually move the needle. Entrepreneurs, and we've set that high bar. If we don't, then we'll fail. And we are ready to make that high bar happen, because we are not intending to fail here.
Yep.
But ultimately, that startup success happens because the founder is amazing and at the center of it. No amount of advice can help if there's no force of nature at the center of it.
Yep.
Okay, we have one more, maybe 2 more mistakes that we got to cover
Yeah.
quickly. So after you have a weak pipeline, you fix that. The next mistake is a generic vetting process. Your vetting process is no good. Talk about that mistake. What are the main mistakes, and then how do you fix it?
So what I mean by that is as simple. It's kind of an extension of not knowing what you're looking for in the first place, which is generic vetting processes, meaning you go into the interview and you come out saying to your colleague, hey, you should meet this person, good guy, good gal, right? Something like that. And why? And then people ask why, and you give generic answers. And the next interview is basically the same interview again because there were not enough notes passed on it. And the right way to do it would be to say, okay, this is the problem we are solving for. So accordingly, this is what we need to vet in this person. And I dug in on these 3 questions that would matter to this role. And when I pass on the next interview to you, I have and then we debate about it and all of that, right?
How do you feel about the hiring by committee thing? Do you feel like it's important to have, multiple steps, or does that, is it like venture where consensus is sort of antithetical a bit?
Our experience would say hiring by committees doesn't work well.
Okay.
Ultimately, the hiring manager needs to believe in the hiring manager, meaning the immediate manager of that person.
Yep.
Needs to believe in that person for sure.
Okay.
That said, there is some benefit in taking the time to vet the person and getting 1 or 2 more inputs from people who matter. So we don't advise, at least again, like we are investing at seed stages. So we advise, the 2 founders meet the person. Maybe there's a 3rd person who's relevant to it, but anybody irrelevant, we try to not have them as part of the recruiting process. But again, the founder is in control and they decide, but that would be our guidance.
Do you think?
But ultimately, if there's a debatable, if there's a controversy, at least my guidance is who's going to be the manager. They need to take the call based on the inputs given.
All right, so you talked about it earlier, but now talk about the close again. What mistakes do people make at close? It sounds like the main one is they're not aggressive enough when closing.
Or they don't understand the game they're playing. They don't play to the emotions.
They don't sell along the way.
Yeah, they're doing all the interviewing and none of the selling.
You guys already got it. So I'd say approach that the person that you're going to want eventually needs to be sold, and don't get to the point where you got bought in and they have not bought in at all.
Yeah.
And so one is every meeting with the person you like, most likely you will look back and say every meeting should have been a buy and sell meeting. Second is realize that there's a larger than life narrative that you will have to sell again and again and again as a startup founder, not just for recruiting, also for investing, also to customers. And so get comfortable with that larger than life narrative selling, and in recruiting that matters a lot. And bringing the intensity. So once you are ready to make the offer, that last 72 hours is key. That's when they are. So I'll give you a tactical example. So if I like a candidate, even when we are recruiting at Audacious, and I will never let a Friday happen where they are going into the weekend. They don't know where they exactly stand. Why? Because weekends is the time when a candidate is talking to their mentors, their plus ones, whoever matters to them in their decision, or they're just mulling it over, right? So if you're letting the weekend happen when some other offer is on their mind or something else, then you're wasting that time, and whoever wins the weekend, if you're especially trying to close, in closing mode, you should just be all over that weekend. The more time they're spending on you, the less time they're spending on something else. Now, that's let's say it's not a competitive situation. And then I think I would take a different tactic. So there's a lot of emotional tactics that you're applying. So if this is the person who's saying, look, I wasn't even in the job market. I'm not into it. You made the offer. I'm excited about it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have engaged. But I do need the time. Then you might have to respect that time. But then what you do is you get 3 of your own supporters, text the person, right? And respectfully text the person and keep the excitement high. So you don't take 2. But if it's a competitive offer and there are 3 offers, whoever wins that time, no matter what the candidate says, whoever wins the mind share.
Whoever wins the weekend wins the candidate.
Yeah, in my mind.
You know what this reminds me of is Adam Edmonds is the CEO of a great company out in Utah, Entrada, and one of the better recruiters I think we've ever talked to. And he does just that, where he'll get, he has professional athletes or different things like on the cap table. They're doing video voice messages and sending it. And it's and it's not suffocating, but it's very constant. It's consistent pressure, right?
It's about, there are 48 hours in that weekend. Mm-hmm. Where are those 48 hours going? This is how also, by the way, winning deals happens, right? Yeah. So founders will say, I need time, but actually somebody else might take up that time if you don't take that time
That's
up, right?
right. That's
so
right.
that's just the reality of life. Like, again, there's a theory that is talked about on Twitter, and there's a game that is getting played on the ground, and the game on the ground is much more aggressive.
Yep.
So you have to take the time if it's a competitive situation. How do you take time? Text messages incoming, videos like this. Go on a hike. A hike takes 4 hours. So suddenly you took 4 hours that your competition couldn't have, right? Instead of doing a phone call, do a lunch meeting. Instead of a phone call with your mentor or some supporter, suggest a lunch meeting. It takes half an hour to go to the lunch, 2 hours to be there, suddenly you took 3 hours, but a call would have taken 45 minutes. It's
Yeah.
it's really a game of making sure your competition doesn't get the time in their head that you need.
All right, I'm going to repeat the formula for everyone listening because this is gold.
This is
and
so
every
good.
founder and early stage operator who's recruiting needs to internalize the formula. So number one, I'll just invert it. Internalize that good is the enemy of great. Number two, get clarity on the role and the job spec. Number three, fill a very strong pipeline so that you have a real choice. Otherwise, you're getting the leftovers. Number four, do not have a generic vetting process. Have a highly specific vetting process tailored to the things you're hiring for. And then number five, close with urgency. That's the formula for everyone listening today. Man, there's so much more we could dive into.
The only thing I'd say is I wish it was a formula. Yeah, life is more messier than a formula would have. So I don't like the word formula when it comes to our world. If there was a
Frameworks.
formula, all of us would be winning all the time. Despite everything we say, mistakes happen on vetting and closing. But we are all in the game of increasing the probability of success, not a deterministic game.
Why don't Sterling and I give you some of the questions we ask everybody to
Okay.
wrap up? Should we do that?
Yeah, let's do
Sterling,
that.
you want to kick that
Yeah.
off?
So the first one called the Golden Spur question.
Okay.
And we talked about your background coming out here from Mumbai to San Francisco, but what makes you the way you are? Like, why are you doing this? Why start Audacious? Why be in this game? What is driving you?
It's a great question. I've asked myself, so I do have, in some ways, you had not asked this question before, but I do have a semi-ready answer. I think the thing that drives me the most personally is great human journeys. Like the thing that fascinates me the most in life is how two people born in similar situations, both are at D. Shaw as VPs or MDs, and one then leaves and becomes Jeff Bezos, and the other remains and becomes an MD at D. Shaw. Both had good careers, but one had an all-time great career, right? How does Rafa Nadal and become Rafa Nadal? So if I wasn't doing venture and I had all the money in the world to not worry about a job, I'd probably go around the world interviewing unbelievably great people and documenting that in a book. That is the thing that gets me up every day. Like, and the greatness of journey is not just from the situations that happen, but what the agency and the willpower that it takes, the grit factor that it takes to make greatness happen, is the thing that fascinates me more. So I do personally consider myself very lucky to have this job, and that I'm meeting all those people every day, and I get to work with them and be a small participant in their journey. So
Very cool.
So in the spirit of the IO podcast, we also ask people who the investor they admire most and the operator they admire most. So I know it's putting you on the spot, but any investor that you particularly admire or you've tried to mirror your career after that you really think is phenomenal?
Can I answer in the form of a firm?
Sure, yeah.
So I think the two firms that I admire the most are YC and Sequoia. And the reason is I truly believe that they are built in the service of the founder. They are built as products and platforms for the founder. Like, I think YC doesn't even think of itself as a venture firm. It thinks of itself as a platform for founders to unleash their greatness in the world. That to me is just a higher level of admiration that I will give to any investor. Now, their monetization model looks like a venture model and all of that. And I think Sequoia, at least from the little bit I've interacted with them and then, what the lore I have heard, does feel like they've kept that ethos at the center of it versus, there's a new guard happening in venture, in the sense that venture is changing and we've become a mainstream business, and there's a lot of mindset around AUM and money deployed and deals done. I still feel like I'm probably the youngest of the older guard, where I still feel like we got into this business because of the craftsmen of great startups and great founders. And for me, like Audacious, if it wins, I would look back and say, hey, these are the founders we partnered with, and they remember that on those days where things were tough, we were there, or that amazing hire we closed for them, or we changed their thinking on some small thing that mattered in the long run.
You were
For
one
me,
of the 5 to
ultimately,
10.
yeah, the Audacious wins if the founders think we were good participants in their journey and needle movers. And I think YC and Sequoia seem good role models for me on that front.
Makes sense. Same one for operator.
It's always hard to choose this. There's
Maybe
so
we
many,
exclude anyone in your portfolio, outside your portfolio.
I think maybe this is controversial for today's day and age. Yeah, the entrepreneur that I admire the most is Elon Musk. And I say controversial because I'm not trying to make a political statement here. I just think the sheer audacity with which he's approached his life, the scale of the goals, the risk he's taken when people would leave PayPal, they made 200 million, they would just, call it a day. And, here's somebody who actually put it in 3 things, and those 3 things nearly went bankrupt, and he powered on, and just the stories of him. So I just think that what he's doing is at a scale that humanity has never seen before, and the sheer grit and audacity of it, and the long-term nature of it is just insane.
He's an
to pull it
audacious
off.
founder.
I wish he was an audacious. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure he's fundraising for XAI. You can probably get in the deal.
Yeah, with our seed fund, yeah.
Yeah, your seed fund. It has been phenomenal. Thank you for taking the time to walk all our audience through the recruiting playbook you've put together. The principles are timeless, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2 on the traits of audacious founders.
Thank you for having me.
This was awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.